The Gothic period is going to begin in the 12th century, which will be a kind of transitional period. It's going to flower in the 13th. It's also going to be a very French style, and all of the architectural movements we've been looking at, the Romanesque and the Gothic, these are going to develop in France, so they are very much French-based creations. The Gothic will also then seamlessly flow into the Renaissance, which will be a style we're going to be focusing on when we get to Italy. So there's going to be a little bit of a shift with the Renaissance, but the high point of the Middle Ages is going to be very much French. In the 13th century in France, cities are going to grow in size, and of course I'm particularly thinking of Paris. Paris will actually become an intellectual center. It's going to be a place with a university where individuals can study and learn, so that education comes out of the borders of the monastery and is accessible to more and more people. As that happens, attitudes in the 13th century are going to change. We're going to see a drift into a more secular society. And along with that, we're going to see changes in religion that actually is going to bring it back to the baseline where religion in the early Christian period began. By that I mean the religion that is embraced by folks in the 13th century is again going to become warmer, and God will become more approachable. One of the most important images that helps us as art historians to actually see that will be increased images of Mary. Okay, you might be thinking, okay, well, why Mary? Well, Mary is the mother of Jesus, so we end up getting images of religion that relate very much to human life, to mother-son relationships, to loving relationships, and the entire religion itself becomes much more approachable in the 13th century. In this period also, there will be a number of preaching orders that are going to change the way in which we look at the world. For us, probably the most important will be the Franciscans. St. Francis, and probably you've all heard of Francis. You've seen statues in gardens of a monk with animals. That's Francis. In the 13th century, and Francis is very much a real person, Francis of Assisi led a group of monks on a new path, and this path was one of incredible love. Francis preached the message that God loves us, that we are worthy, and our world is also worthy. The message of Francis is helping to bring back humanism. And one of the things he told his monks was, get out of the monastery, hit the streets, and talk to the people. So in the 13th century, we are truly embracing new ideas and change. These changes are going to be visible in Gothic architecture. The goal of Gothic architecture is to transport you into a spiritual realm. In other words, into a place that makes you feel close to the divine. The two slides that I have on the screen, on the right, we have a Romanesque church, and on the left, we have Notre Dame. It's located in Paris. It's the church I would particularly like you to know, and it is figure 1310 in our textbook. The reason I'd like you to know this one is that most of you are probably going to travel in your lifetime, and many of you will get to Paris. And if you go to Paris, there are a couple things everybody sees, and one of those things is Notre Dame. In comparing the two, and they do represent two very different styles, you can see, I think, that we're following the same basic formula. If we go over here to our Romanesque church, we're going to see that there is a tripart division, three parts. This is the central section. This represents the nave. We've seen this before. A side aisle over here and a side aisle over here. We can also see the divisions as the church goes upward. When we go to Notre Dame, what you should immediately see is we have the same three divisions. and we have divisions going upward. But the facade or the face of the church is now broken up more. It's moving away from those migrations compartments, and it is fusing the details of the surface of the church, almost disintegrating to fragment the solid nature of the structure. And that's going to be even more evident when we go inside and take a look. The other thing that you should notice that is strikingly different is the pointed arch. So we know for Romanesque it's the Roman arch which is rounded, but if we go over here, I'd like you to see at the very tip of the arch there is a point. Okay, well, where did that come from? Well, probably it came from the Middle East and was witnessed by Crusaders. The Muslims invent the pointed arch way back in the 8th century. It happens to be a more efficient arch. It reduces lateral stress, that's stress essentially coming out from the sides, as the two halves of the arch press together. What this means is that you can actually go higher in your building if you use the pointed arch as opposed to the rounded arch. The rounded arch basically has gravity coming down on its center. So the pointed arch is better as a technological invention. So we have the pointed arch, but in addition to the practicality of it, it also points directly upward towards heaven, and it adds to the lightness of the architecture itself. Okay, so the features of Gothic, number 1 is the pointed arch. The pointed arch will help to allow height in the building. In addition to that, however, there's another element that is incredibly important for allowing these buildings to go higher and higher. This new element is the flying buttress. Now, in Europe, we did know about buttressing, putting heavy supports on the exterior walls of buildings. But when we get to the Gothic period, we do something slightly different to carry the massive weight from the ceiling. And remember, this is a stone ceiling that weighs tons. We want to transfer that weight to the outer walls and down to the ground. So we place next to our outer wall of the cathedral or the church heavy buttressing, but in the upper levels we actually send a projection up to meet the wall and to carry the weight, to transfer the weight from the ceiling. And that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at some of the rib vaulting that disperses the weight within the ceiling. These flying buttresses will take the weight from the ceiling and transfer it to the heavy support of the buttress and allow that weight to be carried to the wall, to the ground below. What this does then is to open up the wall. We now don't have to use that whole solid wall to support the church. So what do? We fill that wall now with windows. However, we don't use plain glass windows, which is the trend that was a part of Romanesque. Instead, we fill those windows with stained glass, with multicolored glass that is held together with leading, creating images that tell stories, but also that create a mystical interior inside the church. So we're going higher and higher with this new technology, and we're creating a more and more mystical, religious, and spiritual interior. Okay, so part of Gothic we have is pointed arches. We also have flying buttresses, and we have stained glass windows. One last thing to point out, and that is that instead of just having those ribs make clear divisions in the bays of the church nave and side aisles, what we're doing now is inserting ribs that crisscross and, like the stays of an umbrella, help to hold the shape and transfer the weight and do the work, basically. These examples of rib vaulting would also add to the ability of the technology of the structure to go higher and higher. And that is one of the elements of style in the Gothic period. At Notre Dame, we begin with 107 feet. That's from floor to ceiling on the inside. Very quickly, the cities around Notre Dame are going to go higher. The next one will be Chartres, which is a neighbor. And Chartres is going to go 120 feet. The cathedrals surrounding Chartres and Notre Dame are going to go even higher, competing with their neighbors, but also pushing forward the idea of reaching to the heavens. This is a view around the apse end, and you can get a little bit of a look at this buttressing, which extends into space, helping to hold the structure up. As we go ahead in time in the Gothic period, this buttressing is going to get lighter and thinner, so we almost look, as we examine the church, we almost get the sense that we're looking at a spider web. This is a view inside Notre Dame. We are in the nave going down towards the aisle, and as you look up at the ceiling, okay, here's a unit and the edge of that unit on the other side. You can see the vaulting now. It has multiple ribs. The ribs crisscross, and they evenly distribute the weight, carrying it much more efficiently down to the ground. The image on our right is of the crossing of Notre Dame, and you can get a peek at the scale of this as you see the people seated in the nave and also in the crossing arm. I'd also like you to look up here, because what we're looking at in the crossing arm also is a view into one of those stained glass windows. This is a view into the vaulting, and remember, we're 107 feet up in the air. Can you imagine putting these stones into position up there? I'd also like you to see the crisscrossing of the ribs as they help to support by dispersing the weight of the heavy stone ceiling. I'd also like you to get a sense of how skeletal this building is becoming. Everything seems to be thinner, seems to be soaring, seems to be almost paper thin. The whole point of Gothic is going towards the heavens, opening the walls with mystical light coming through stained glass windows, and making the building look like it's being supported almost by the will of God. This is probably the classic example of the spirituality and the mystical quality of Gothic architecture. It is a rose window. These come from Notre Dame, the samples that I have. The one that you have in your book is 1318. And it is actually from Chartres, so please look at that. But I'd also like you to know that Notre Dame has rose windows, and the rose has become associated with the Gothic. It is an important innovation because the rose itself is a symbol of love. Just think of Valentine's Day and how we give our love flowers, but particularly we give roses. At the very core of one of these windows that I have up here for us, and it's right in here, and I'd like you to see all of the radiating parts coming out like the petals of a flower, which is where we get our name from. But in the very center there is an image of Mary holding the Christ child. It underscores the new role that Mary plays in the Gothic and the loving nature that is returning to religion. Mary is depicted as a mother who cares for her son. We can all relate to that relationship, and is placed at the center of a symbol of love itself. We're making our way back to a religion that is loving and that is approachable. I can't leave Notre Dame without saying something about the gargoyles. The gargoyles are perhaps among its most famous feature. These gargoyles actually were rain spouts. You can see my best example is located over here. This is not a new idea. This has been done for centuries. Directly underneath that, there's a lion with an open mouth. That's 6th century BCE, archaic Greece. So this is an old tradition. However, on Notre Dame, these images have taken on almost a kind of fantastic aspect, and there are lots and lots of legends that surround them. What I can tell you for certain, because not everybody agrees about the legends, is two things. One, they were functional. They're gutters, folks. They're rainspouts, so they really, really work. The other is They derive from migrations. This is a continuation of migrations, and this is a pin that comes to us from Ireland about the same time period. Look at the mouth of the beastie, and I'd like you also to remember the stained glass also is very migrations.